The Johnson family had been dreaming of this vacation for years. It wasn't just any trip. It was their chance to escape the noise of the city and create memories together in the heart of nature. They saved up little by little, cutting back on luxuries until finally they could afford a cozy cabin in Aspen, Colorado. The idea of waking up to snow-capped mountains, breathing fresh air, and spending time away from screens excited everyone in the family. On the day of their journey, the car was packed with snacks, blankets, and toys for the kids. The parents sat up front, chatting about how peaceful it would feel to sit by the fireplace at night while the children played board games. In the back seat, the two siblings laughed and argued over who got to pick the next song to play. Everything seemed perfect, the kind of moment families dream of. As they drove closer to Aspen, the scenery changed dramatically. Towering trees lined the roads, and the crisp mountain air seeped through the windows whenever they rolled them down. When they finally arrived at the address of their rented cabin, their faces lit up. It looked even better than the pictures online. A charming, wooden house nestled among tall pines, with a porch that overlooked a serene lake. For a moment, all four of them stood there, taking it in, feeling like they were stepping into a postcard. But as they started unloading their bags, something unexpected happened. A neighbor across the street peeked out of their window, curiosity turning into suspicion. To this person, the sight of a black family arriving in a luxury SUV didn't fit the usual image of visitors in the area. Without giving it much thought, the neighbor picked up the phone and dialed 911, reporting suspicious activity at the cabin. Within minutes, flashing lights disrupted the tranquil scene. Police cars pulled into the driveway, blocking the path to the cabin. Confusion rippled through the family. What was happening? Why were the police here? The parents tried to stay calm, not wanting to alarm the kids, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Little did they know, this dream vacation was about to turn into a nightmare, and nothing would ever be the same again. The sound of sirens shattered the calmness that had once filled the air. The father stepped forward, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace as he tried to make sense of what was happening. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with confusion. He explained that they were on vacation, showed them the keys to the cabin, and even pulled out the rental agreement from his bag. But none of it seemed to matter. One of the officers, a tall man with a stern expression, barked back, "How do we know this place belongs to you? This doesn't look like your kind of neighborhood." The words hung heavy in the air, sharp and cutting. The mother, standing nearby with her arms wrapped protectively around her children, felt her stomach drop. She wanted to say something, to defend her family, but fear gripped her throat. Her youngest child clung to her leg, wide-eyed and trembling, while her older one stood frozen, clutching a stuffed toy they had brought along for comfort. Things escalated quickly. When the father questioned why they were being treated this way, another officer muttered something under his breath, a comment laced with prejudice. Though it was quiet, the insult carried weight, landing like a punch to the gut. The parents exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding. They knew better than to argue further. Experience had taught them that speaking up often made things worse in situations like this. Despite showing IDs, calling the rental agency, and doing everything they could to prove they belonged there, the situation only grew more hostile. Within moments, handcuffs clicked shut around the parents' wrists. Their protests fell on deaf ears as they were led toward the police car. The kids screamed, tears streaming down their faces, begging the officers to let their parents go. It was chaos, loud, heartbreaking, and surreal. As the squad cars drove away with the parents inside, the two children were left alone in front of the cabin, surrounded by strangers. Neighbors who had been watching from afar began to gather, some whispering among themselves, others filming the scene on their phones. For the kids, time seemed to slow down. Every second felt endless, every emotion overwhelming. They didn't understand why their peaceful day had turned into such a nightmare. All they knew was that their parents were gone, and nothing made sense anymore. What started as a joyful escape into nature had become a cruel twist of fate. Little did anyone realize, though, that this incident was far from over. Somewhere in the background, a neighbor's phone camera rolled, capturing footage that would soon spark outrage far beyond the quiet mountain town. The video of the arrest spread like wildfire. A neighbor, who had been watching the whole scene unfold from their window, decided to film it, not out of curiosity, but because something about the situation didn't sit right. At first, they thought maybe the family had made a mistake or broken some rule. But as the clip captured the calm demeanor of the parents and the aggressive tone of the officers, it became clear that something was very wrong. The neighbor uploaded the footage online with a simple caption, "This doesn't feel right." Within hours, the video blew up. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. Comments flooded in from all over the country, some expressing anger, others sharing their own stories of being treated unfairly by law enforcement. Hashtags like "Justice for the Family" and "Wrongful Arrest" started trending, drawing attention not just to this one incident, but to a much bigger issue plaguing communities everywhere. Local news outlets picked up the story, airing interviews with residents who lived near the cabin. One elderly woman who had seen the family arrive earlier that day spoke up. "They looked happy," she said, shaking her head. "Just a regular family on vacation. I don't understand why anyone would think they were doing something wrong." Her words resonated with many, striking a chord about how quickly assumptions can turn innocent people into suspects. As the story gained traction, civil rights organizations stepped in. Lawyers offered to represent the family pro bono, vowing to fight for justice. Community leaders called for an investigation into the police department's actions, demanding transparency and accountability. Even people outside the town joined in, organizing protests and signing petitions to ensure the family's voice was heard. What struck everyone the most was how ordinary the family seemed. They weren't celebrities or influencers. They were just everyday people trying to enjoy life. That relatability made their ordeal hit even harder. Parents imagined themselves in the same situation, wondering if their skin color might one day put them in harm's way. Kids talked to their friends about the two children left behind, imagining how terrifying it must have felt to watch their mom and dad taken away. Amidst the outrage, there was also guilt, especially among locals. Many admitted they hadn't realized how unwelcoming their town could be to outsiders. Some confessed they had never questioned why certain types of people rarely visited their area. The incident forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about their community and the biases that lurked beneath the surface. By the end of the week, the story had reached national headlines. News anchors debated whether this was an isolated case of misconduct or part of a larger pattern of systemic racism. While opinions varied, one thing was undeniable. The family's peaceful vacation had turned into a catalyst for change. And, though no one could undo the pain they endured, the growing support gave hope that their struggle wouldn't be in vain. As the investigation into the arrest unfolded, shocking details began to surface. Details that painted a disturbing picture of the officers involved. It turned out this wasn't the first time complaints had been filed against them. Records showed a pattern of behavior, with multiple accusations of racial profiling and excessive force over the years. But here's the kicker. Most of these complaints had been brushed aside or buried by higher-ups in the department. Internal reviews often ended with a slap on the wrist, if anything at all. The system seemed designed to protect its own, no matter what. The family's lawyers dug deeper, uncovering emails and memos that revealed how some officers openly joked about targeting outsiders in the community. One document even included a racist joke scribbled in the margins, which sent chills down people's spines when it was leaked to the press. This wasn't just about one bad day. It was about a culture of prejudice that had festered for years without being addressed. But the biggest bombshell came when the security footage from the cabin's cameras was recovered. The rental property had been equipped with surveillance equipment, something the family didn't know until their legal team requested access to it. What the tapes showed left no room for doubt. They captured everything. The family calmly unloading their car, laughing as they carried bags inside and settling in like any other vacationers. There was no sign of forced entry, no suspicious behavior, nothing that could justify an arrest. The rental agency also confirmed the booking was legitimate, providing time-stamped emails and payment records. They even went on record saying the family had been ideal tenants, respectful and responsible throughout the entire process. With both video evidence and documentation backing them up, the case against the family crumbled completely. For the parents, seeing the footage brought mixed emotions. On one hand, it validated everything they had said from the start. They were innocent victims of a grave misunderstanding. On the other hand, watching themselves handcuffed and humiliated in front of their children reopened old wounds. Their lawyer reminded them that this evidence was their strongest weapon, not just for clearing their names, but for holding the officers accountable. Public reaction to the revelations was explosive. People who had doubted the family's side of the story now felt ashamed for questioning them. Even skeptics couldn't ignore the mountain of proof showing how wrong the police had been. Protesters held up signs featuring stills from the security, footage during rallies, chanting slogans like "Truth Exposed" and "No More Excuses." Social media buzzed with calls for justice, and local politicians scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. By the time the dust settled, it was clear this wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. It was a glaring example of systemic failure. The officers' actions weren't just harmful to the family. They were a betrayal of trust between law enforcement and the community. And while the road ahead would be long, the truth had finally come to light, paving the way for accountability and, hopefully, real change. The pressure on the police department became unbearable. With evidence piling up and public outrage reaching a fever pitch, they had no choice but to act. At first, the police chief tried to downplay the situation, issuing a vague apology during a press conference. "We regret any misunderstanding," he said, his tone careful and measured. But those words fell flat. To many, it sounded like an attempt to dodge responsibility rather than take accountability. Protesters gathered outside the station, holding signs that read, "Sorry isn't enough," and "Own up to your mistakes." Behind closed doors, however, things were starting to shift. Facing mounting scrutiny from both the community and higher authorities, internal investigations were launched into the officers involved in the wrongful arrest. It didn't take long for cracks to show. 2 of the officers, those who had been caught on camera behaving aggressively and making racially charged comments, were suspended without pay. A 3rd officer, who had stood by silently while the chaos unfolded, was also placed under review. But the family's legal team wasn't satisfied with just suspensions. They pushed hard for criminal charges, arguing that what happened went beyond negligence. It was abuse of power. After weeks of deliberation, the district attorney announced that 2 of the officers would face charges for misconduct and violating the family's civil rights. The news sent shockwaves through the town. For some, it felt like justice was finally within reach. For others, especially within the police force, it was a bitter pill to swallow. In response to the scandal, the town decided to implement sweeping changes. Mandatory diversity training programs were introduced for all law enforcement officers, focusing not just on racial sensitivity, but also on de-escalation techniques. A citizen oversight committee was formed, made up of local residents, tasked with reviewing complaints against the police. These steps were meant to rebuild trust between the community and law enforcement, though many remained skeptical about whether they'd actually make a difference. For the family, these developments were bittersweet. On one hand, they were relieved to see consequences for the officers' actions. On the other hand, they couldn't help but feel frustrated knowing that such measures should have been in place long before their nightmare occurred. "It shouldn't take something like this happening to spark change," the mother told reporters during a brief interview. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but her message was clear. This wasn't just about her family. It was about preventing similar injustices in the future. As the case continued to unfold, national attention shifted toward the small mountain town. Journalists wrote think pieces about systemic racism in policing, while activists used the story as a rallying cry for reform. Yet despite all the noise, the family stayed focused on healing, not just for themselves, but for their children, who still struggled with nightmares and anxiety after witnessing their parents being dragged away in handcuffs. Justice may have started to take shape, but the scars ran deep. And while accountability was a step forward, everyone knew there was still so much work left to do. The ordeal left deep marks on the family, ones that couldn't simply fade away with time. The parents tried their best to shield their children from the weight of what had happened, but it wasn't easy. The youngest child, who used to love bedtime stories and playing outside, now woke up in the middle of the night crying, reliving the moment when their mum and dad were taken away. The older sibling, once full of energy and laughter, became quiet and withdrawn, hesitant to trust strangers, or even authority figures like teachers or store clerks. Counseling sessions became a regular part of their lives. At first, the kids refused to talk, their tiny faces clouded with fear and confusion. But slowly, they began opening up. Drawing pictures helped. One day, the younger child sketched a police car with big red X's over it, while the older one wrote a short poem about wanting to feel safe again. It was heartbreaking, but also a step toward healing. Their parents sat with them through every session, holding their hands and reminding them that they weren't alone. But the couple didn't stop at just helping their own family heal. They wanted to make sure no one else had to go through what they did. They started attending rallies and speaking at community events, sharing their story with anyone willing to listen. At first, it was terrifying. Standing in front of a crowd, recounting the humiliation and fear they felt that day, brought back all the pain. But as more people nodded along, some wiping away tears, others clapping in support, they realized their voices mattered. Their message resonated far beyond their small town. People from different walks of life reached out, sharing their own experiences of being treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. Some were students who had been followed around in stores. Others were professionals pulled over for routine checks that turned into interrogations. Hearing these stories only strengthened the family's resolve to keep fighting for change. They joined forces with advocacy groups working to combat racial profiling and police brutality. Together, they pushed for stronger laws to hold officers accountable and demanded better training programs for law enforcement. The mother often spoke at school assemblies, teaching kids about empathy and standing up against injustice. The father, meanwhile, worked closely with local leaders to draft policies ensuring transparency in policing. Their activism inspired a wave of grassroots efforts. Neighbors organized workshops on bias awareness. Churches held prayer vigils for unity, and schools introduced lessons on civil rights history. Slowly but surely, conversations that had long been ignored were finally happening. And while progress felt slow, every small victory gave the family hope that maybe, just maybe, their pain could lead to something meaningful. Through it all, the family never lost sight of why they were doing this. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It was about making the world safer for their children and for countless others. As the father put it during one speech, "We didn't choose this fight, but we're not backing down. If our story can help even one family avoid what we went through, then it's worth it." Healing wasn't easy, but turning their pain into purpose gave them strength. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, they walked it together, with courage, determination, and an unshakable belief in a brighter future. Months had passed since the nightmare unfolded, but the family decided they weren't going to let fear dictate their lives. They talked it over as a family, parents and kids sitting together one evening, and agreed that Aspen wasn't just where something terrible happened. It was also where they had dreamed of making beautiful memories. "We can't let them take that away from us," the father said firmly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The mother nodded in agreement, squeezing her children's hands. "This time, we go back stronger." When they returned to the cabin, the atmosphere felt different. Word of their story had spread throughout the small mountain town, and this time they were greeted not with suspicion, but warmth. Locals who had once been silent now stepped forward, eager to make amends. A neighbor brought fresh-baked cookies to welcome them back, while another left a heartfelt note on their doorstep. "Thank you for coming back. We're so sorry for what happened here." The cabin itself seemed unchanged. The same cozy wooden walls, the crackling fireplace, and the breathtaking view of the lake. But it carried new meaning for the family. This wasn't just a vacation spot anymore. It was a symbol of resilience. As they unpacked their bags, the air felt lighter, almost hopeful. For the first time in months, laughter echoed through the house again. The kids ran around outside, tossing snowballs at each other, their giggles melting away some of the heaviness they'd carried for so long. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the family gathered on the porch. Wrapped in blankets, cups of hot cocoa cradled in their hands, they sat quietly for a moment, taking it all in. The father broke the silence. "You know, we've been through something really hard. But look at us now. Look at how far we've come." His words hung in the air, simple yet profound. The mother smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "And look at how many people are standing with us now," she added. "That gives me hope." Their second visit wasn't perfect. It couldn't erase the scars of the past, but it marked a turning point. It showed them that even in the face of darkness, light could find its way through. People in the town weren't just apologizing, they were learning. Conversations about race and fairness were happening more openly than ever before. Schools incorporated lessons on equality. Businesses hosted workshops on bias awareness, and the police department continued working to rebuild trust. Change was slow, but it was real. For the family, this trip became more than a vacation. It was closure, a chance to reclaim what had been stolen from them. On their last night, as stars twinkled above the mountains, the father pulled out a journal and wrote a few lines. He jotted down moments from the week, noting how much joy he saw in his children's eyes. Then he added something else. "We didn't just survive this. We grew stronger because of it." As they drove away the next morning, the kids waved goodbye to the cabin, promising to return someday. The parents exchanged a glance in the rearview mirror, silently acknowledging how far they'd come, not just as individuals, but as a family. Somewhere in the distance, the wind rustled through the pines, carrying whispers of progress. It reminded them that healing wasn't just personal, it was collective. And though the journey ahead might still hold challenges, they knew they weren't walking it alone.